Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about spiritual light as the foundation of life, and why John said in 1:4-5, "In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." In this show, we will discuss the term writing in the Bible as the process of spiritual substance being infused with the divine will, known as light. Listen as we explore what is meant by "to the angel of the church, write," in Revelations. There are 7 thought windows called churches or chakras in consciousness to let in divine truth. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and express divine will. Swami, the title of today's show is Light is Spirit, Inspired with Truth. So can you tell our listeners why you chose that particular title for this week's program?
After going over Herb Fitch's La Jolla series, and this was in class 9B, where he talked about truth and spirit as the tools he suggested we do. And he doesn't mean human truth, but divine truth. And then he goes on in 10A and 10B, and he instructs us on the transfiguration of Jesus. The transfiguration of Jesus revealed to John, Peter, and James, and how to internalize these figures into individual consciousness. And what I'd like to do is really focus on the term light in this show. And in transfiguration, mountaintop is high consciousness. John is divine love, to love God supremely. Peter is faith, to have faith in the presence, perfection, power, and activity of the God you love supremely. James is sacrifice of personal sense, to surrender to the divine will. When these 3 qualities are united in individual consciousness, this brings forth Moses and Elijah, which is truth and spirit. When truth and spirit are united, this brings forth the Christ, the light of the world. And in this work, he tells us this process of spirit being inspired with divine will is what the Bible referred to as writing. And then, of course, having exposure to revelations in the Bible and that statement that we use in the opening, because in Revelations, it is mentioned 7 times, to the angel of the church, and then there's 7 churches, write. As I began to unbox this and apply it to what we've been doing in Kriya Yoga, I came up with this diagram or schematic that we use for our logo, and then I just plugged in all of the information to it.
So let's break that down maybe just a little bit more and talk about when Jesus turned into the light. What does that represent for us?
Jesus turning into the light is the birth of the Christ. The Christ is the light that enables us to perceive the divine creation. Now, what we want to start to look at is all of the steps that lead to this realization. And the way we do that is by converting John, Peter, and James into figures we internalize in individual consciousness. They are symbols. John is love, Peter is faith, James is sacrifice. Now these must be united in individual consciousness. And then in that transfiguration, then Moses and Elijah appear. Moses is truth. Moses is divine will. And Elijah is spirit. And when spirit and divine will are joined, that is what they called light. The disappearance of Jesus and the appearance of the light, the Christ.
So when Jesus reappears, what do we learn from that?
Well, Jesus reappears when they come down from the mountaintop. So when we come out of divine mind, divine consciousness, and we're back at that sense level of awareness, then everything reappears on a corporeal sense level. But the value of that is you achieve the understanding the only thing that is real is the light, and the appearance is the false sense. And light itself is an interesting symbol because there isn't anything faster than light. Spirit inspired or infused with divine will is another way of describing omnipresence. I am everywhere now. When we speak of spiritual identity, we're not saying spirit indwelling me or me seeking spirit. We're saying I am one, which means I am everywhere. This spiritual oneness is before thought and above corporeal sense, which means it can't be comprehended with a material mind because the corporeal senses work on contrast, duality, and divine mind works in the absolute. It comprehends the one. It's like we said in the opening, and the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehends it not. Our material senses don't perceive the oneness, the spiritual fact of being that underlines the appearance. But this reveals the unreality of the appearance, the mental image that prevents us from seeing the light of the divine creation.
So in the first part of that verse, and we're talking about John chapter 1, verse 4-5, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. Are we talking about life with a capital L here? Can you kind of break that down for us?
What John is doing here for us, he's introducing the idea of principle and idea. Now, the way I understand this, Mary Baker Eddy uses 7 words to describe God, and one of them is life. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And then Mary Baker Eddy described that as man is God's reflection. And her way of further explaining that is reflection is mind considering its own content. This is how you can start to understand the oneness. And I really like the way C.S. Lewis explained that when he said he never thought Hamlet could know Shakespeare. He never really thought it was possible to have a personal relationship with God because man is God's idea. So we are all the light of the divine creative principle. But like we say in Kriya Yoga, Namaste, we are all divine, but we are not all equally sensitive or aware of that divinity. But if we are conscious of that divinity, then that will begin to pierce through the false appearance of the mental recreation and enable us to perceive the truth, the divine truth that is always omnipresent.
Swami, you mentioned earlier Mary Baker Eddy had 7 words for God, and one of them was life. Could we talk more about that?
Yeah, I actually have a diagram. I use the information from the logo that we use for Institute for Personal Development, and I've cross-referenced all of this information so that we can apply the 7 words for God that Mary Baker Eddy used to the 7 chakras, the 7 churches, and the 7 personal planets in astrology. And the way I compiled it is starting with the first chakra, Muladhara in yoga, which is the root center. The church is Ephesus, and that equals existence. The planet is Saturn. Christian Science word is principle. The obstruction is time. The antidote is spiritual sense. Now, the other thing I'll let you know is this information is going to be on the website, on the post that we make with the radio show, in case you don't catch all of it in the show. But the second chakra is Svadhisthana, Jupiter at the navel center. The church is Smyrna, which equals immortal life. Again, the planet is Jupiter. The Christian Science word is soul. The obstruction is space. And the antidote is self-existent eternal life. The third chakra, Maniparaka in yoga, which is the solar plexus center. The church is Pergamos, which equals divine consciousness individualized. The planet is Mars. The Christian Science word is life. The obstruction is form or concept. The antidote is impersonal view of limitless law. The fourth chakra, Anahata, which is at the heart center. The church is Thyatira, equals divine love. The planet is Venus. Christian Science word is love. The obstruction is matter or belief. The antidote is behold divine presence. The fifth chakra, Vishuddha, the throat center. The church is Sardis, which equals dominion. The planet is Mercury. Christian Science word is mind. The obstruction is thinking or movement. The antidote is all-seeing light. The sixth chakra, Ajna, third eye center. The church is Philadelphia, which equals divine will. The planet is the moon. The Christian Science word is truth. The obstruction is human will or animal magnetism. The antidote is divine wisdom. And the seventh chakra, which is Sahasrara, the crown center, the church is Laodicea, which equals spiritual identity. The planet is the sun. Christian Science word is spirit. The obstruction is personal sense or ego. And the antidote is truth of being. Now, as you start to put all of this information together, if you have the diagram, I find it to be very helpful because it really gives you a template for the Lord's house. In my Father's house, there are many mansions. When you're trying to comprehend the absolute in finite terms, this diagram I find can be very helpful.
So, Swami, how do you recommend that we use this information, this table that you put together?
All of this, for me, comes under the heading of educating thought up to spiritual apprehension, which is always living up to an individual's highest sense of right or good. However, never accepting limitations in any way, shape, or form, and always remembering divine creation is perfect.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor, so listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. Swami, earlier in the program, we were talking about writing to the church. And in the summary, we said we were going to explore what is meant by "to the angel of the church, write." I'm wondering if maybe we could explore that maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, that comes from revelations in the Bible. And for each of the churches that we just mentioned that correspond with the chakras, it is written, "to the angel of the church." Now, the church is Lord's house, divine consciousness, and the angel is the idea, the divine idea, the word of God that comes from the church or divine consciousness. And again, we're talking about principle and idea, where it says write. And we understand now, writing is the joining of spirit with divine will. And this information reinforces what we have been saying all along: like attracts like. And to ask in my name means to be in my likeness. We must assume spiritual identity in order to write to the angel of the church. In order for us to comprehend the Word of God, we must be in spiritual identity. And what leads to that is what we were talking about, this union of John, Peter, and James in high consciousness, in individual consciousness, the union of love, faith, and a willingness to give up personal sense. And it all comes together when we begin to understand what it means to write. And then we have to repeat this 7 times. As we are elevating consciousness from a material sense level up to this higher sense of understanding, divine consciousness. Now, the way I understand this on a fundamental, practical level is just by looking at a house and all of the different systems that are functioning in that house today, because we don't live in an Adirondack lean-to anymore. Our houses have indoor plumbing. They have electricity. Some of them have indoor vacuum cleaning systems. We have air conditioning. We have heating. And to understand divine science, you really have to have an understanding of how this is working. And here's a way of organizing information and cross-referencing it with different wisdoms that will give you a game plan. But it's really instruction to do something. Not just learn this on an intellectual or a academic level, but to actually experience the presence of this oneness.
Swami, let's talk more about the word light. And I believe we have something from Bicknell Young that could shed some light on the subject.
Yeah, light, again, as spirit inspired with divine will. This is from Bicknell Young's Oneness under the heading of humility, and I'll read it. In Genesis it reads, and now this is the quote from Genesis, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth." End of biblical quote, back to Bicknell Young. In the beginning God created the understanding and consciousness of principle and idea as one. In another statement, Jesus said, "I am the root and the offspring of David." That was from Revelations 22, verse 16. He did not say, "I am the root only," or "I am the offspring only," but "I am the root and the offspring of David," or principle and idea, or God and man. According to John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in Genesis, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In other words, this understanding of oneness with God brings light. That's the end of the quote. And this is the light that comes when we are no longer thinking with our material senses, but we are now activating our spiritual senses, these 7 thought windows that we talked about. And as we start to illuminate our thought with the divine idea, we are starting to get more and more of this light in consciousness.
I think that's the first time I've seen, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, meaning that the understanding of oneness with God brings light. I think it's the first time I ever heard that.
And it's probably because nobody ever says it that way. The more we start to understand what is meant by the term light, which means spirit inspired with divine will, and then starting to realize personal will and personal sense interferes with our ability to see this light. We have to give up personal will in order for us to be under the government of divine will. And this is 180 degrees from the way that we're socialized today. We're all trying, striving, struggling, planning, seeking, primarily because we don't see the light. We don't see the divine creation, which is right here, right now. It's perfect. But what we're seeing is our human mental recreation of it, not under divine law. And so as a result, there are imperfections, opposite forces that are at work at that level of consciousness. We're learning by stopping thinking and starting knowing, and knowing this truth. Life is perfect, not just stopping thinking and not reacting to what seems to be imperfection and challenges and problems, but knowing life is perfect and watching, waiting, beholding, letting it express itself through you has a profound effect on what is appearing. Spirit is a demonstrable principle, but it's not under personal will. It's under the government of divine will, which is absolute goodness, absolute harmony.
And that just sounds like you just described what Jesus was doing in the Bible.
Well, that's a big message of the Christ. Spirit testifies with deeds, not words. The works Jesus was performing was the revealing of the divine creation, what is already here. He wasn't fixing what seems to be problems on a physical level.
So I'm thinking what you're saying, Jesus didn't see problems the way we see problems.
No, Jesus had what they call the mind of Christ, which is what the Bible calls the mind of God, too pure to behold iniquity. Jesus is perceiving the light, the divine creation, which is behind the human mental recreation, and by not reacting to the mental image, he is faithful to the spiritual fact that is behind it. And because consciousness is experience, that will externalize the divine image with divine qualities if you're not getting off at the wrong stop.
So I see we have a pretty good example by Bicknell Young in oneness that maybe you could go over with us.
Yeah, well, what I'm trying to get across here is we have that information that we went through with these 7 chakras, 7 churches, 7 personal planets, 7 words that Mary Baker Eddy used for God. But everything is very interchangeable. We're trying to comprehend this, like I said, with a mind that can't bring forth the divine image. But everything that we're doing is educating thought up to spiritual apprehension. And we're always living at our individual highest level of good or right, because we really want to stop analyzing this with our mortal mind, and we want to start to know the truth with divine mind. But one of the ways that you can start to do this is understanding that these terms can be interchangeable. In his work, Bicknell Young on oneness, He gives us an example where he uses life and truth, where Herb Fitch used truth and spirit. And I'll read it. As a divine student, he, referring to Jesus, unfolded God to man, illustrating and demonstrating life and truth in himself and by his power over the sick and the sinning. That's a quote from Science and Health, page 117-16. In unfolding God to man, he illustrated life and truth in himself. Note that life and truth are capitalized, which means God, and he demonstrated God within himself. It takes God to unfold God to man. Any attempt to do it otherwise would be a misapprehension of the science of living. In all things, we must begin with God to find the correct solution. Note the two conditions, illustrating and demonstrating. Because Jesus illustrated life and truth in himself, and he was the form by which we could see it. And because he demonstrated life and truth in himself, he showed it to us by his work, thus proving his power over the sick and the sinning, because Jesus was the way shower. That indicates his way must be our way. Hence, we need to understand scientific being. For all of us, sometime must be able to do the work of the Master and Mrs. Eddy. End of his quote. This is what I really like about Christian Science, is that it's really forcing us to prove the presence of the divine creation. Not just talk about it, not just believe in it or worship it, but to actually demonstrate the presence of this divine creative principle. And if you're having trouble proving the presence, maybe you don't have the right formula. Maybe you're not using the information in the way that it was designed to be used. It kind of reminds me of trying to figure out something on your cell phone. There's a series of movements that you do in order to be able to accomplish a particular task. And I think Jesus and Mary Baker Eddy approached healing in the very same way. They understood exactly how this was happening, and then from their level of understanding, they knew the unreality of anything that does not have divine qualities. And by knowing that to be true, it liberates us from the false belief that it is.
So, Swami, what would be the pragmatic application of all this information you've given us today?
Well, say, for example, using your asana program, your asana practice to give you clues. Am I conscious of the divine creation? You use the testimony of your senses, and anything that has lack, limitation, imperfection, pain, discomfort, instability, you know it cannot be under the jurisdiction of divine law. It's not God's will. Therefore, it's not real. It isn't there. Rather than trying to fix something on a material level, what we're really trying to do is let go of the belief, the false concept that it is imperfect, and then without trying, striving, struggling, planning, we stop, and then we let divine law, we let divine mind take over the scientific government of our body. That will resolve things into thoughts and exchange the objects of sense for the divine idea.
Well, we're going to start breaking down our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, when you see the fading banner Blog Talk Radio, if you click that will direct you to the Blog Talk Radio Show catalog page. And then don't forget, by clicking on the Products tab and Online Classes, that directs you to all the classes that Swami has available for you. So with that, Swami, any final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and express divine will. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.